Make a start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Siobhan. I'm the Director of Youth Affairs Network of Queensland. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal custodians of the lands that we are coming from. I come to you from the Bundjalung Nation in Northern Rivers, where I've been in exile from Queensland because of COVID for the last few months. And pay my respect to elders past, present, and their struggle for achieving self-determination. I'm very excited about this forum today, and I guess from ACT. But at this stage, I'd like to pass on to Lorraine from Queensland Youth Housing Coalition to say a few words as well. This forum is the fifth that we've done online since last year. And we've done this in partnership with Queensland Youth Housing Coalition, as they are the peak body for the Queensland Youth Housing. And so we acknowledge them, and where issues of housing comes, we work in partnership with them. Housing, we actually did a survey before we started these online forums last year, asking the sector what are the priorities in terms of things that we want to talk about. And housing was number one. And as you know, whenever there is a survey, anything to do with youth issues, housing is always number one. So, and it has been like that for the 30 years or so that I've been in the sector. So it seems things are not getting better in the way we're doing stuff, but hopefully today we hear about a model that, in my view, has got great potential to actually do something to help this situation. But I'll pass it on to Lorraine. Lorraine.
Thanks, Siavash, and welcome to Siobhan and Peter. I'll leave Siavash to do the official introduction, but welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us. And thanks for the introduction, Siavash. I just wanted to let you know that Rhiannon from BYS was going to be presenting some important research that they have done on couch surfing and some of the findings from young people, and a model, an assessment model they have also. So she couldn't make it today. But just going to let you know that she is going to be presenting at the Quick End of Year Forum on the 13th of December. So we'll send you out an invitation to that very soon, so we can do the couch surfing part 2 there. So that'll be lovely. So I just wanted to let you know that, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I hand back to you, Siavash. Enjoy the forum, everyone.
Thank you, Lorraine. Now, just two bits of housekeeping before we start, and that's one is, if you're not speaking, could you please put yourself on mute? There will be a presentation by Peter and Siobhan, and following the presentation, there is a couple of case studies, hopefully, that we'll go through, and there will be time for question and answer at the end. So if you could please, if anything comes to your mind, jot it down and keep it till that session, towards the end of the session. So without further ado, I pass it on to Siobhan and Peter to take us through their presentation. And Siobhan and Peter, you're not muted?
No. Hello, everybody. We're saying hello from the ACT, Ngunnawal country. That's the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting you guys on. Thanks for having us. This is our first Zoom presentation, so if we get a bit clunky, I hope you'll be kind with us. I've worked in the youth sector for over 30 years in lots of different roles, starting off in resi care and then moving into homelessness services and health promotion and that sort of thing. I'm currently managing 3 SHS services in the ACT, the couch surfing or YS program, the one we're talking about today, Friendly Landlord, and Our Place, which is a foyer model. And Pete is one of our very valuable staff members. We've got a team of 9 in the homelessness programs. And Pete can introduce himself and tell you a little bit about what's brought him to our world.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Pete. I've been in the youth homelessness sector probably for around 25 years. I've primarily always worked with homeless people and primarily homeless youth. So I work a little bit across the 3 programs in this that we have here at Bernardo's, but I primarily work on the YISP program.
Okay, so we might start with our presentation. Do you want to share the screen? Oh, the green one. Can everybody see that? Maybe thumbs up. Is that okay? Great. So the name of the program is Youth Identified Accommodation Support Program, YIAS, which is the name given to it in its most recent iteration of funding. We still call it couch surfing pretty much because that's what the program stems from. Do you want to do the next one? So the program's been funded in various iterations since 2007. And it's basically self-sourced accommodation by the young person. So we're supporting placements that young people have already made themselves. The current target group is young people aged 15 to 19 who are at school and have minimal or no contact with formal bricks and mortar housing or homelessness services. The service receives funding to provide 1 worker to provide flexible outreach and transitional support to these young people. And since the program started in 2007, we've supported over 200 young people.
Siobhan, could you please enter full screen?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Where would it?
Okay.
That one?
Yeah, oh no, we'll turn it off. Display settings at the top.
That's it. Great. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. So the objective is to support the young person and what we call the host family to maintain that relationship if we can, and establish alternative pathways through the homelessness service system. So it's actually bypassing the bricks and mortar services altogether if possible, and that's by operating from primarily a family support model as well as some youth work to keep that placement sustained and long-term as possible, particularly focused on the young person finishing school. So the kind of support that we offer is practical support and brokerage, assistance with utility bills, medical bills, essentials vouchers and educational expenses, referrals to other agencies, access to second-hand furniture and household goods, funding driving lessons, licence fees, and in some cases a weekly allowance of up to $150 per week can be paid to the couch surfing hosts to assist with the extra cost of an added person in the household. The couch surfing clients who are in receipt of an income, whether it's Centrelink payment or wages, are required to pay board directly to the carers or the hosts. We're also able in some circumstances to provide caravans to households to use it as an extra bedroom for the couch surfer. With the caravans, they're not self-contained. We remove all the kitchens and cooking equipment, so they're merely a sleeping area. And they're not always used by the young person. There might be an adult in the house that would prefer to escape the teenagers and move into the caravan, thereby freeing up a bedroom within the main living arrangement. This program works really well with Aboriginal families who may already be hosting multiple couch surfers. And the caravans are particularly popular in that community in the ACT. We've also partnered in the past with an organisation in Victoria called Kids Undercover, and we're lucky enough in the early 2010s to source a couple of bungalows which have been installed at 2 properties in the ACT. They've never moved though. In theory, they're meant to move around according to need, but the people who've hosted these couch surfers have hosted multiple couch surfers, so they've just remained in place. And Kids Undercover, I think we're very interested in doing more in the ACT, but we don't have a big philanthropic culture here. There's a lot of people with money, but they're public servants, so they're not always into the big sort of donations so much. So it hasn't taken off as much as we would have liked in the ACT. So. So we do case management or coaching with the young people, but a lot of it is family support and working with the host family to see what, strengths and resiliencies that they have in terms of being able to continue to host the young person and working on enhancing those strengths and existing capabilities. Once the initial housing crisis is resolved, long-term educational and housing goals and employment goals where appropriate are established with the young person and they're worked towards during the couch surfing placement. And we use a holistic client-centred approach when working with the young people and the family. And the goals are reviewed regularly. We often have young people transition out of year 10. In the ACT, year 11 and 12 are actually at separate schools. We don't have year 7 to 12 in ACT. So we will support the young people to transition through year 11 and 12 and then often into vocational and occasionally into university education as well. So we don't recruit hosts. We get referrals usually from schools or the hosts themselves that they have a young person staying with them and that they've been told that we might be able to support them in some way. The most common hosts are older siblings or the parents of school friends. We go out and we do an assessment, which is a bit like a foster care assessment, but not as rigorous. We'll do police checks on all the adults residing at the property and also assist the hosts and adults residing there to apply for a Working with Vulnerable People card. And we can only pay the allowance to the young person, to the place where the young person is staying, if all those checks come back okay. In the rare cases where they don't come back okay, depending on the circumstances, we may be able to just provide in-kind support through vouchers. And often we may follow a young person around their couch surfing journey, providing vouchers to the various places they stay, if they're safe places. The hosts are able to access ongoing support from the program workers, and that support really just varies from host to host. Some people need a lot of support. Some people are really able to manage the whole situation really well on their own. Just a bit of positive feedback and acknowledgement is always welcome from these wonderful people we have in the community hosting these kids. If the hosts are interested in doing training, they're able to access Bernardo's training, and we also offer supported access into other sort of community-based training opportunities like, mental health first aid or accidental counsellor courses, that sort of thing. So we try and sort of skill the community through that way as well. So we do a three-way sort of MOU with the young person, the host and the agency, and we'll just go through that contract in a minute. Then that contract's sort of like a live document and gets reviewed at least every 6 months. Usually it's fairly static unless there's been issues in the placement. So we'll go through with what each person has to. So what we agree to do is provide the appropriate safety checks, administer the payment of financial and material assistance, provide information and advocacy, advocate on the behalf of the young person and or the support family, identify appropriate referral pathways for young people, deliver services in an accessible manner, and provide and encourage young people in the program to access to improved mentoring and life skills program. The host family agrees to, and obviously they can modify this as they feel comfortable with, provide meals, utilities and material assistance, encourage and assist the young person in their care to achieve their personal goals and engage in education, encourage and assist the young person to maintain contact family with where appropriate and wider community, agree upon mechanisms for dealing with conflicts. So we do quite a bit of mediation in that program, just sort of normal adolescent stuff, curfews, behaviour, friends coming over, that sort of thing. Assist and facilitate access to health services. So they may take young people to appointments, but if there's any cost involved, we would be funding that. and negotiate an agreement with the young person in regards to what personal costs the young person will be responsible for, e.g. clothes, toiletries, fares, entertainment. And that really depends on the young person's access to income. If they don't have income, we will assist them access income. The young person agrees to provide board payments to the support family based on 25% of income received, agree upon the conflict resolution mechanisms, actively engage in their education or training, participate in their share of household tasks, and negotiate an agreement with the support family around costs. So referrals can come from anywhere in the community. In 2011, the ACT government, in its wisdom, introduced a central intake service, despite being the smallest jurisdiction in Australia. Spend a lot of money on that. Our referrals still mainly come from school support staff, social workers, counsellors, family and friends. And we focus on re-establishing and maintaining links with educational institutions. There's a couple of case studies here, so Pete will talk through those.
So, yeah, one of them, Susanna, who was referred to us in temporary care program. She was initially accommodated with a crisis carer, but she moved in with a friend of the carer, and we just negotiated a more formal arrangement. When the arrangement broke down, Susanna went to stay with school friends and family. So, and we were supporting that arrangement in partnership with ACT Housing. Kids Undercover gave us a bungalow at the property, a house Suzanne, and hosts, and the host child. So the two of them moved into the property. It was a 2-bedroom bungalow.
This one's a bit small.
Yeah.
On to the next one. Oh, go back.
Yeah, so we've provided support there for around 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite good. She later on got pregnant and had a baby, and then moved out of there then, and moved into ACT Housing. I've got a couple of others here which are probably more recent that I've worked with. A good one is a young person Bowen, who he was living at home with his mother, who had some substance abuse issues and some mental health issues. And one night, mother actually, he ended up being assaulted, so the police had to remove him. He didn't have anywhere to stay other than one of his friend's parents' place. So he went and stayed there, and she was a single mother, struggling a little bit. And so the police suggested they contact us for support. Owen never attended school because his mother would keep him at home. She would say, you need to help, support me because of my issues. And so as soon as he moved in with the host family, we really pushed the point that he needed to return back to school. He did go back to school. He did struggle at first. He went into a transitional education program to begin with. And then after the first 12 months, he moved into mainstream education. He's now been staying there for around 2 years. He's finished year 12 last year, and he's actually now started a traineeship to become a teacher's aide. So that was a pretty good outcome. We're pretty flexible in who we will provide support to. So sometimes we will, as long as it's not immediate family, we can still provide support to them. And one of the other good examples I've got is I'm working with a young lady who, she was actually in one of our other properties, and it ended up being a bit of a domestic violence situation where she had to leave the property, and they both had to leave the property, and she became homeless, and CYPS got involved and took her child away. So what happened was the child ended up going and staying with her grandmother, and she obviously ended up having to become more or less homeless again. She started staying with a few friends, but grandma was really upset at the fact that she had the great-grandchild, but didn't have the granddaughter living with her as well. And so what happened was CYPS, which is our care and protection service down here, they wouldn't allow her to live in the house with the child simply because of her mental health and substance abuse issues. So what we negotiated with them was, or what we suggested was, if she went and did a rehab program and then come back, would there be the opportunity for her to move in with the grandmother? Initially, they said no. Well, they encouraged her to do the rehab, obviously, but no to her moving back into the house. So what we did was we suggested a caravan where she lives. And she's not allowed to live in the house still, but and that's still going through. Well, it's better for her to have her space anyway because it frees up space within the house. But she's finished doing her schooling now. She's just got a part-time job, and we're also supporting her to get a license at the moment. So that's been a really good outcome. She hasn't had to come into contact with any other services other than ourselves and the care and protection. So that's been good for her because she was sort of a little bit reluctant to sort of reach out for support. And a lot of support I've been giving has been to grandma to sort of help her to sort of maintain that situation. So yeah, it's a pretty good outcome.
You want to do questions?
Yeah. Has anyone got any questions?
We might open it up to questions now. If people want to do that, before we stop sharing in the slideshow. Go there.
I got a question. I was just curious about the uptake from families to formalise some of that support they're providing naturally anyway, and how how people respond to that. What's that like, building that connection with a family who's doing that support already in the community, and and are people just really willing to come on board and to formalise that arrangement, or is that a bit of a process?
Most people are already doing it. So I think practically every case I've had, they're probably saying, yes, we want this person to stay here. The issue we're having is being able to afford it or to make it a viable thing. So usually when I walk in and say, well, how about if I give you a few extra dollars to be able to do that, how does that sound? And that usually says, that's great, that's what we need. Young people are expensive to keep. They eat a lot of pizzas. So it's just, and by also saying that we'll support this is also a big thing for some families.
It's like a validation of what they're doing too. And I think people are often surprised that there is support available. We do a lot of feedback surveys across the 3 programs, and the most positive feedback we get is from that program, both from the young people accessing it and from the host families, in terms of how having that support from the agency has been transformational for them, and has enabled them to continue that support for a lot longer than they would have otherwise been able to. So yeah, generally we don't have any resistance to our involvement at all. But I guess it's because the majority of referrals are either self-referrals or coming from an existing connection within the school community. So there's sort of that relationship. It's not like they're referred by CYPS, which is care and protection. It's a more organic process. And
like, I had another situation recently with one which didn't work out. It didn't work out because the young person, he'd been out living on the streets for about 6 months, and he was invited to come and live with his footy coach. And the footy coach had pretty strict rules, and that didn't work out. But I suppose the good outcome of it was that because I could go in there and negotiate it all, we were able to put in some, we could start the conversation going about what needed to change. But that young person wasn't kicked out straight away. He sort of said, well, we're not going to put him out on the street again. And so we were able to give the young person time to find somewhere else to go. And sort of within 2 or 3 weeks, he did find another place to go. And then we followed him to that other place. And he's now at his 3rd place. So he has been a little bit of a difficult one. But in saying that, each time he's moved, I've sort of been able to come back to him and say, well, why didn't that work? How about you sort of follow the guidelines we're going to put in place a bit closer? And this last time he's been there for, you know, I suppose as a kid that was on the streets 12 months ago, he's now living in a place where, and he's recently got himself a traineeship and is really loving it and doing really well. So it didn't work straight away like we would have liked it to, but it was just a matter of sort of being there to both support him and the host family. Like with this 3rd family, I actually went in there and in front of him, I said, look, this is why it's sort of broken down in the past. And, you know, he had to acknowledge that he had to change a few things. And they took that into account as well. They were pretty good about it and sort of said, well, we don't want that to happen again. Let's work together. So with the contracts we sign, they're not set in concrete. I really leave it up to the host family to negotiate with that with the young person. Like I had one family who they were asking the young person to pay them rent, or they were getting the rent, and they actually saved all of that. So later on, that person could get a car and also have a bit of money to live independently themselves later. So some of the host families are really amazing.
I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one is actually a point of clarification. So at one stage, Peter, you said as long as the person, as long as it's not immediate family, we can provide support. And then on another occasion, you talked about siblings being a common support person. So I'm a bit confused about that in terms of.
So it can't be a parent.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't support people to have their own children at home. So it can be a sibling, it can be a grandparent, it can be an aunt or an uncle, or an unrelated person. So, but it can't be a biological parent.
We had once done a biological parent, but the circumstances were the young person had not lived with that parent previously, and it was a sort of we sort of just helped out. We also use the caravans, which is quite a handy tool to have, and so in some situations, giving them that extra space is a huge advantage.
Because interestingly, as you're talking, and thank you for that clarification, I'm just really conscious that a number of the conversations we've had up here, and of the number of conversations about families who are at risk and young people who are at risk of falling out of the family, it sounds like quite a good model for families at risk. So, so it's interesting, that delineation. Now, another question I just wanted to ask is, what's the demographic of your families? Do you have the demographics of the families who do support the young people that you're working with?
Generally, it'd be generally like lower income families, and majority would be single parent families.
Yeah.
So it's often the people that would be accessing services potentially from our other family support programs, and potentially, I guess, their kids may be coming into contact with other kids who are, you know, coming from similar backgrounds to themselves. We do occasionally get more affluent families, but that would be unusual.
Thank you.
And it's a predominantly, apart from the Aboriginal families, we struggle to get culturally diverse young people into that program. And I guess one of the reasons we sort of think that might be is because in Canberra, because it's very small. And if a young person from a culturally diverse community can't live with their family, there's only really a limited amount of other families that would be from the same culture that would be potentially able to support them. and because of the cultural sort of values and mores in those particular cultures, it's unlikely they would take in another young person, because that might sort of bring shame onto that family. We do get some culturally diverse young people connecting with white families, and they will stay with them, but we sort of continue to try and get more referrals from that cohort, but it's a bit tricky, and they generally would go into one of our other homelessness services, which are bricks and mortars.
On a different note, I'm just wondering if you had any barriers with local council around, having the additional dwellings on the property in terms of caravans and bungalows, and whether there was any planning and development application barriers for you?
Not really. A lot of the caravans do go into our public housing properties, and I usually write a support letter, so they've got to actually put in approval to have that extra dwelling as such put on their property. We've never had one knocked back by ACT Housing, as long as we follow their requirements, which it needs to be in the backyard. We put in the proper power, so we put in a proper 15 amp direct line into their power box, so we pay for an electrician to hook it up properly. We tell them it doesn't have any cooking facilities, so the young person still has to have access to the property. I suppose because we do write the letter saying we're alleviating a homelessness issue, and I haven't had one knocked back from public housing yet. I've got one at the moment which is about to go into a privately owned property, and 2 houses down there's a caravan in the front yard, so I don't think I'll have an issue there as well. They own their property, so we'll still install it properly and make it as discreet as possible.
And with the bungalows, which were actually plumbed into the sewer and all that sort of thing, the 2 that we have, it was sort of like a 3-way process between ourselves, Kids Undercover, and ACT Housing. So ACT Housing did all the scoping of works, but both those bungalows went onto properties where both the blocks, were probably like, I don't know, 1,500 metre square blocks with tiny little 3-bedroom houses on them. So massive outdoor area, so plenty of capacity to put an extra dwelling. So if you're interested in that KUC, just if you go on their website, there's a lot of information.
Yeah, no, I know them very, very well. I love Kids Undercover. I know Joe, so yeah, I was just interested to see whether you guys had the barriers.
No, because it was sort of managed between ACT Housing and they own the properties, so they could sort of do all the scope of works. So yeah, we were kind of keen for that to get going, but at that point in time, I think the units were sort of costed about maybe 40 for a 1-bedroom, maybe 50 for a 2-bedroom, which is sort of not really within our capacity to fund. Yeah. So yeah, something to look towards in the future. I don't know what your philanthropic culture's like in Queensland, if there's some rich mining people or something that might want to chuck some money that way, but that could be, yeah, maybe that's an option for you guys. But yeah, it's a really good, particularly for people who are serial couch surfer hosts on a big block in public housing. Like, it's a great way to cheaply increase the capacity of that that property and that person who's residing there.
We've had people move into our caravans that we didn't know were there, and they sort of go, the referrals come through, and we've gone back and gone, oh, that's one of our old caravans, and it was, yeah, one of our old situations. So we often do end up leaving the caravan where they are. Sometimes they say we don't want it here anymore and it has to go. One example we had a household where there are a few other people living in the house. So I think Uncle Joe went and lived in the caravan and the young person stayed in the house. And so it just alleviated that space problem for the family. So we're pretty flexible in who actually lives in the caravan when we put one there. Yeah, I've got the one where I'm about to move one at the moment. They've got 6 people living in a 3-bedroom house. So to put 2 of them in the caravan is going to sort of solve a lot of their issues.
So is there more questions?
Just in terms of your approach, it sounds like you've made a real intentional decision to be, you talk about person-centered, but it sounds like you take an intentional decision to sort of step back and be more facilitators, or, just to, like you said, be flexible and provide support depending on each situation organically. Can you just talk a little bit more about, why you decided to go down that pathway of, doing that in a conscious way?
I guess the arrangement already exists. So all we have really to offer to the situation is resources and some infrastructure. So I guess it's about trusting the wisdom and the capacity of the people who are already kind of doing the work that we're funded to do, and really looking for ways how we can sort of support and increase that resiliency. And I think that's why it's such a good program, because it exists on its own without support, but with support it can make it a lot better and also expand the opportunities for everybody in that household. So I guess, I think because we could see the people were doing it without our assistance, really, by coming in there with, practice frameworks and formalities and checks and balances that aren't really that necessary, like how is that adding to the experience? And often you can push people away if you overcomplicate things. So that it was a conscious decision.
I make it very clear when I meet with the family and the young person for the first time that I'm not going to come in there and tell the host family how to run their household. Usually they've got their own kids, and I sort of say to the young person that's going there, you've got to follow their rules. They make the rules. This is their house. And everyone really appreciates that, I think. We don't sort of come in and tell them how to do what they're doing.
And I guess it keeps a young person in a family environment for longer. So as soon as a young person goes into a crisis refuge or, a longer term transitional property, the expectation is that they will become their own gatekeeper and step up to adulthood. And often, I'm sure you see this in your services as well, young people are not ready to do that at 15 or 16. They really need and benefit from a longer period of time spent in a home-like environment where there is an adult setting reasonable standards for behaviour and routines. So we found that the kids that we're accommodating through that program, actually their long-term outcomes are usually much better. And if they do eventually transition into one of our bricks and mortar properties, which some of them do, they it's a lot easier for them to make that transition because they've already built those skills and seen those skills modelled by an adult, whereas in their family of origin, they might not have seen those skills modelled at all. So if they're transitioning straight from a home where things aren't so great into crisis, then into transitional, they haven't actually ever had that opportunity to see how it's done, learning by example. So we can run living skills groups, we can do rent it, keep it, we can do all these programs, but really the key learning for life skills is within a family environment. And if we can keep those kids there for as long as possible, I think it's a win for the young people and, the community as well, and all of us working with the young people.
If anybody's got a question, you also can put your hand up in the participant window so we know that you're waiting.
Do you want me to talk about where the funding comes from? Sorry, I talked over someone.
Go ahead, Siobhan, if you want to talk about your funding source, that's good to know.
Yeah, so the funding is matched funding. We have a federal funding stream, and then that's matched by the ACT government. So we're able to, in theory, I think our capacity is about 20 to 25 young people at any one time. And that sort of goes up and down depending on referrals and stuff. As well as that funding, we have a lot of community support for our programs. So one of the big things that we access is a Rotary Scholarship Fund, where one of the local Rotary clubs provides funds where young people can apply for scholarships, and the scholarships have to be related to education, employment or training goals. So, for example, they'll fund some driving lessons for someone who needs to get their license. They might buy someone a computer who needs a computer for school. They might purchase clothes if they need clothes, specific clothes for employment. They'll fund tools for trade. We have quite a lot of young people going into apprenticeships. So the core funding is from that government funding, but we do look for a lot of resources in the community as well in terms of providing those extras that really make it possible for young people to reach their aspirations, not just survive.
One thing I was going to mention as well, and I've had this happen on 2 occasions.
Thanks, everyone. Rachel, you got a question?
Yes. I once knew a young person who was living in a share house, or it was a bungalow or something along those lines. And she was having difficulties with her school, administratively, places where normally the school would, where the parents would usually sign a permission slip, or, you'd need the parents' permission to go home on a sick day. This young person was complaining of difficulties with the school not letting her manage her own affairs because she couldn't get parental permission because she didn't live with her parents. Have you ever encountered issues similar to that? And if so, how did you work around it?
Okay, yeah, that's quite common. It really sometimes depends on the school. So some schools I find are better with it than others. What I usually go by is if they've been accepted by Centrelink to be independent, then you can actually use that as the grounds to tell the school that they are an independent young person, and that then they can choose who their guardian might be. So I've got a young person at the moment who she's nominated myself as her guardian, and the school are quite happy to speak to me because she's attending school where she wasn't before. And so sometimes when the school are aware of the circumstances of them not being able to live at home, when you explain they still have a stable home where they are, and they've also got another adult such as myself, or their youth worker, or it might be another youth worker they're working with, we've found that the schools will accept that. I don't know about other states, but here in the ACT we can sort of, as long as they're over 16, it's not really an issue with getting them to be able to, the schools to understand that someone might not live in a normal circumstance.
Thank you.
One thing I was mentioning before was twice this year I've actually been able to get young people to go back home as well, which is another, like they were in situations where they had left due to just a breakdown in the family, but they weren't in circumstances where it wasn't there was no issue with them returning back home once a bit of negotiation with the parent. It kind
of wasn't irreconcilable, and I guess with a more temporary couch surfing arrangement, that can actually give the family time and space to work on those differences and actually attend mediation if appropriate. And because the young person isn't prematurely being pushed into independence in a transitional or crisis service, they're still in that home-like environment. A successful restoration to the biological family is potentially more likely. So, yeah, the two that we've had this year basically it was just buying a bit of time and space and letting tempers sort of cool down. And then when everyone had sort of worked through a couple, the issues and a few other things needed to be resolved, those families were ready to sort of move forward. And I guess that's where the aspect of the family support of the program comes in as well. If you're looking at replicating something like this, you need to have really good linkages in that family support, family mediation space, because it's really drawing on all those resources to assist the young person and their family, whether it be the host family they're staying with or their biological family. So it's funded as a youth homelessness program, but when I look at the skill set of the staff that we want to have in that program, you do really need someone who has that youth work experience, but also that capacity to work with families and, has good linkages within the family services sort of area of service delivery.
Well, we're waiting to see if anyone else has got a question. I throw a couple at you. One is in regards to police checks. You mentioned that you do a police check. Where is the line that you draw there? Like, what sort of a history is acceptable and what is not?
So any like sexual offences, that would be a line that we would draw. Any like offences of violence, I suppose, yeah, like in terms of drawing a line, you would look at the individual circumstances, and that has to go through the agency's kind of risk matrix as well. But for example, we did have one once where the police check came back with a lot of historic drug offences that were the host on the host's record. It was a single mum, but the drug offences were sort of 12 years in the past, and there'd sort of been no offences since that time. So I guess we had a conversation about that person's past and how things had been then and how things were different then. And that person had kind of been to rehab and actually made a new life for them. They had their own children, and the decision was made to fund that. So I guess it's particularly this program, you're working with community members who may have historic things or driving offences. Often the driving offences may be linked to poverty rather than, people not having the money for rego but needing to get the kids to school. So they've driven an unregistered car and got picked up. So yeah, like apart from the sort of sexual stuff and the violence stuff, and even the violent stuff, we have had one in the past where it was a woman again who'd been in a DV situation. So there was lots of, charges on him, charges on her, but it was quite historic. So I guess it's talking through those things with the person, and then applying the agency's risk assessment to that. But yeah, certainly one interesting one we did have was there was someone who wasn't actually the host, but a frequent visitor to the family who did have sexual offences. And basically we had to have that conversation with the family that that person, if they wanted us to support and fund the arrangement, that person could no longer attend the property. But the interesting thing with that person was that they were more of a risk to the younger children in that family, not so much to, I think it was a 16-year-old boy who was residing there, but the nature of the offences on that person's record indicated that that family really needed to think about why they were having that person come to the house. But that,
how did you find
beg
out?
your pardon? Sorry? Is it frozen? Is he frozen? Sorry?
How did you find out about? How did you find out about that person? How did you find out about that person?
So he had to, all the adults who reside at the house or, you know, are frequent visitors. And this guy was actually kind of known to our services because he was also, was a complicated situation. Anyway, we knew this guy was often staying there and sort of hanging around. So we're like, well, we need to check him as well because he's there and we can't, you know, we're an agency, we can't be seen to be supporting inappropriate things. So it was, yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. But anyway, we worked through it, and this guy was no longer permitted by the people whose property it was to come there and to stay there. But I guess, yeah, sometimes, yeah, when you do those police checks, you don't know what you're going to find. So yeah, that was a complicated one. Fortunately, those ones don't come up too often. Requires a lot of skills in diplomacy and yeah, negotiation and stuff. But yeah, the nature of that person's offences would have indicated that, because there was a lot of younger children in that home, and that person shouldn't have been like permitted to go there in terms of what had happened in the past. And they were historical offences, but I guess with that sort of thing, even though they're historical, they're still very pertinent to where there's young children. Is that?
I'm turning my video off. Yeah, that was great. Appreciate that. I just turned my video off because my internet is unstable. But people, please put your hands up for any questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going. I'll shoot you another question. And this one is about, I've got an assumption that I want to run by you. And that assumption is that because the host family is already doing this work and taking the young person in, money is not the motivation scenario. If we were to say, for instance, go out and try to promote this to community, saying there's money and support available, as opposed to this where they already are doing it, you're going on top. Would that be in any way correct, you think, this assumption?
We have, like in the past, they have tried to sort of have a program where it is a community boarding program. So it's promoted as, hey, you know, have you got space? Do you want to take on a young person? And I know they're still trying to do that in the out-of-home care space within the agency, but it's not as successful because the arrangements are brokered by the agency and organised by the agency. So they're not like a natural organic process. Whereas the people we're supporting, they've already taken it on through the, you know, it's a cheesy expression, but through the goodness of their heart, they've taken on this situation. They've opened their home and, you know, their wallet to accommodate another person who's in need. So, yeah, look, they have tried to replicate it, but with kind of limited success. Like in the ACT, there's a few things like, there's a lead tenant program where they will sort of let someone have free accommodation in terms of, in return to live with like a couple of young people who are in out-of-home care. And I think they struggle with that. And I guess too, once you set up the arrangement, it's all your sort of like workers' comp and all that kind of employment stuff comes into it. Like, is this person an employee? Are they a volunteer? If they get injured at work, there's a whole other kind of ball game. And I guess the kind of money we're paying, like I think the max we can pay is like $150 a week, Pete. So for me, like I'm a parent of 4 teenagers, you can pay me like $3,000 a week to have another one at my house. So, you know, we're not in that ballpark in terms of, you know, offering that funding. So really, yeah, look, people could try, and it has been tried, but I don't think it is as successful. And I think, yeah, there's probably more risk than reward in those situations.
So initially, while we're waiting for police checks and everything to be done, we start giving people vouchers. That's usually a $100 voucher a week. for the young person. And I think in the whole 5 or 6 years I've been doing this, there's only been 2 or 3 instances where someone's rung up and gone, like, I don't sort of give it to them on any particular day of the week. And some weeks we might accidentally, like we might run out of vouchers. Or I think I can count on one hand the amount of times a carer has rung me up and said, hey, where's my voucher this week? So most of them are doing it out of the goodness of the heart. And, you know, they just see the extra bonus we're giving them as a bonus, as you know, some $100 a week. Yeah, it's not going to help much, but it's enough to sort of sometimes make that difference.
And if the young person's transient and we are sort of like they're moving between households, often the vouchers can be a bit preventative in terms of young people being exploited if they're actually bringing something to the arrangement. Like if, you know, I don't have any money, but I can buy some groceries, that gives the young person a bit of power in that situation. And I guess with those particular young people, they are very vulnerable. So we're always checking in with them in terms of, you know, exploitation of any kind. And we have had a couple, I think there was one last year where they were in a, you know, sustained couch surfing placement, but then they chose to leave and move in with an older guy. And yeah, we had concerns about that. We weren't supporting that placement. We were giving the young person vouchers for their personal use. But even though that young person was no longer really eligible for our program, we continually checked in with them and kept saying, how are things going? Are things okay? Do you want us to refer you to a refuge? You know, do you feel safe? So the program can also work in that way as a preventative factor with young people who aren't necessarily in a stable placement, but they're having that regular check-in with someone who is kind of aware of the, you know, the dangers inherent in that itinerant couch surfing lifestyle in terms of exploitation and that kind of thing. So that young person eventually chose to leave where they were staying. And yeah, got into a better situation, which was really good. But I guess if we'd sort of gone in there all gung-ho and like, you know, this is really wrong, you can't be here, you've got to get out of here. If you don't have a better option, like that's actually not going to work, and you could actually force that young person to be more enmeshed with the person that they're staying with if it's inappropriate.
Even if they're staying somewhere that might seem inappropriate, the fact that that person has to allow me as a worker to come into their house. I don't give the vouchers to the young person. I give it to the carer and say, you know, we make it clear that we don't give the money to the young person. We give it to the carer, and it's up to them how they spend it because they're the ones who are providing the service.
That's in the settled placements.
Settled placement. So I'm still going in there on a regular basis and having that contact so I can sort of read the circumstances. And if there's any sort of, if it doesn't look right, then, you know, we take action then. So yeah, it's just sort of a bit of a safety net as well that they are staying in a place rather than someone who might show up at another youth service saying I'm staying at such and such a house and no one knows, no one's got contact. Then who knows what circumstances they're in. At least with this, they've actually got a service which is going in and just checking on it that is actually a reasonable situation they're in.
More questions? It's like silent dot people. Are we frozen? Are they frozen?
No, it's waiting for questions, I think.
Okay. And if people like I know I go to lots of these things, I think, oh, I want to ask a question, but I want to ask it later by myself. Like, that's fine. Like, we'll provide our contact details, and if people want to ring up and talk through, you know, other issues or ask more questions, that's completely fine as well. And maybe we can come for a visit and sit on the beach. That's what we're really after, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah.
Still freezing here. We haven't had any warm weather, so yes.
No, hopefully there would be opportunity to have you up. It's a wonderful model. And just one other question I'll throw at you is: have you ever had a gathering of all the families, hosts, and young people, bringing them all together for any function? for them to share just seeing one another of all these good-hearted people?
We haven't really had a specific gathering like we do. The last couple of years too have been tricky in terms of the whole COVID thing. We do have like community events for our bricks and mortar programs. We have Christmas parties, or we've moved away from Christmas to Thanksgiving because it's sort of more non-denominational and a sort of a gratitude focused event rather than just giving people lots more junk. So yeah, that's potentially something we would look at in the future, but they tend to be quite a diverse group of people and not necessarily see themselves as a community. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. That could be something. Pete loves a party. So yeah, even like an online kind of party, we could drop off gift boxes or something. We do a lot of hampers and stuff at Christmas time, just being aware that people have, extras in the house, and having, some more food can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, I was wondering,
All right.
oh, do we have time for a question?
Yeah.
I think
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, I guess sometimes I've seen some young people present with their friends couch surfing at another friend's house. How do you deal with, I guess, multiple young people couch surfing in the same house?
So when we see that, we will usually suggest that they refer to a service that's providing outreach support as well. The onus on our program is somewhere where they can stay longer term. That said, I would sometimes be able to still provide the household with some gift vouchers. So we wouldn't put them on formal payments, but we would provide gift vouchers for the young person. It's a bit hard because it can open a can of worms. We sometimes don't want to make it so as we're promoting that to happen if it's not an ideal situation. We want to try and put them into a circumstance where it's more long-term sustainable, and that they're doing stuff like going back to school and everything like that. So one of our main requirements is that the young person do remain at school, and we really push that point. So
and I guess it's about not overwhelming the host too. Like someone might sort of open their home and then end up with 1, 2 or 3 people, but that is a huge imposition. So I guess often there's varying need amongst those young people. Like there might be some young people just tagging along because that's a more hospitable place for them to stay than when they're coming from. So I guess sometimes it's sort of working out and a bit of a triaging of need in those circumstances. And also what the person, at the person's house, talking to the host and saying, look, do you actually want all these people here? What is it that you want to do? What do you feel like you can provide? Because some people, if they're very kind-hearted, they can just get overwhelmed. And young people can, take advantage, like they're self-interested by nature at that age, like it's a really normal developmental phase of adolescence. So, yeah, I guess in those situations we look a bit more closely and prioritise who is the one who actually needs the support. And sometimes we might refer a young person to a crisis service if that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. So we've got quite good links within that system in the ACT.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Siobhan? We will put on our website the recording from this session, plus Peter and Siobhan's presentation and the contact details, so you can, people who would have liked to see this forum but weren't here, pass on the link. So that should happen by tomorrow. Any other comments, questions before otherwise we'll close the meeting. But Adam, you look like you wanted to say something.
I just really want to acknowledge your honesty, and I really appreciate the way that you responded. Just, you know, it's obviously some difficult situations at time, and it's really refreshing to hear people talk so openly about the challenges as well as the success stories. You know, I know it's really complex work that we do, so it's great to have that. Thank you for sharing that way.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.